List of Christian denominations affirming LGBT. This article needs additional citations for verification. Some Christian denominations do not consider homosexuality or transgender identity to be sins. These include entire religious denominations, as well as individual churches and congregations. Some are composed mainly of non-LGBT members and also have specific programs to welcome LGBT people, while others are composed mainly of LGBT members. Washington National Cathedral Episcopal Church in the United States at DC Gay Pride 2014. In 2003, Jean Robertson was the first non-celibate openly gay person ordained as a bishop in documented Christian history. The LGBT flag at the First Unitarian Universalist Church in Houston indicates that the church welcomes LGBT-identifying persons. Additionally, some denominations which are not LGBT affirming have member organised groups which are not officially sanctioned by the denomination. There are also ecumenical or parachurch programs that are explicitly outreaches to LGBT people, but do not identify with any particular faith tradition or denomination. History. Today some Christian denominations are accepting of homosexuality and transgender identity and inclusive of homosexual and transgender people, such as the United Church of Christ and the Metropolitan Community Church. Formed in 1991, the Evangelical Network is a network of evangelical churches, ministries, and Christian workers that are part of the LGBT community. The Evangelical Network holds an annual conference and provides education, ministerial support, and networking capabilities. In 1946, Archbishop George Hyde of the Eucharist Catholic Communion, a small denomination not in union with the Roman Catholic Church, celebrated Mass for gay men in Atlanta. In 1956, the Church of One Brotherhood was founded in Los Angeles by a gay rights activist. In 1962, a Congregationalist pastor began an overt pastoral ministry to gay people in New York City. The first gay and transgender specific denomination, as opposed to individual congregations, was the Universal Fellowship of Metropolitan Community Churches in 1968. Some congregations are merely non-discriminatory and LGBT affirming, while others are specifically oriented toward gay, lesbian, bisexual and transgender persons. Some local congregations, especially those designated as welcoming churches in the Baptist, Lutheran, Presbyterian, United Church of Christ, Methodist, Episcopal and Brethren Mennonite denominations, may consist of a majority of gay, lesbian, bisexual and transgender members. While Unitarian Universalism is no longer explicitly a Christian religion, it does have Judeo-Christian roots. Both the Unitarian Universalist Association and the Canadian Unitarian Council have officially affirmed LGBT people and have openly advocated for gay rights. Denominations Africa and Asia. Ugly Payan Church, officially known as Philippine Independent Church or Iglesia Filipina Independiente. The church has adopted an official and binding position of inclusion and full acceptance of LGBT individuals and organisations since 2017, after the question of inclusiveness was raised in an official leadership meeting by a gay member of the church in 2014. Its youth organisation wing has also repeatedly elected presidents, vice presidents, and executives who belong to the Filipino LGBT youth sector. Anglican Church of Korea. Note: the Anglican Church has some clergy and congregations that support LGBT rights. Anglican Church of South Africa. Note: the Anglican Church defines marriages between a man and a woman, but does allow for the ordination of gay and lesbian clergy. Bishop Mervyn Castle of False Bay was openly gay and celibate. Also, for lay people, Anglican bishops from across Southern Africa have resolved that gay and lesbian partners who enter same-sex civil unions under South African law should be welcomed into congregations as full members of the church. The Diocese of Saldanha Bay has proposed the blessing of same-sex unions with the bishop's support. Church of South India. Note: the CSI opened ordination to transgendered persons, has ministries specifically for transgender rights, and some clergy support gay rights. The CSI is among the Anglican churches that are open to changing church doctrine on marriage in order to allow for same-sex unions, according to the BBC. The Evangelical Church of India. Members Church of God International, known as Undating Done, as their presiding minister. Bro Alessio Soriano is a prominent member of LGBT. United Church of Christ in Japan, United Church of Christ in the Philippines, Uniting Reformed Church in Southern Africa, Southern SNOD, Dutch Reformed Church in South Africa, NGK. Note: each congregation may determine its own decision on gay marriage and gay ministers. However, in November 2016, the Extraordinary Synod formally defined marriage as a commitment between one man and one woman, and gay sex as a sin. Congregations were allowed to deny employment to married gays, but also allowed to define their own position. However, on the 8th of March 2019, a Pretoria High Court judgment overturned the Dutch Reformed Church's decision not to recognise same-sex unions within the church. The church decided not to appeal the decision. I find that difficult to understand, and you might possibly hear the noise, but it's very noisy here. Dutch Reformed Church in South Africa, NJK. Note: each congregation may determine its own decision on gay marriage and gay ministers. However, in November 2016, the Extraordinary Synod formally defined marriage as a commitment between one man and one woman, and gay sex as a sin. Congregations are allowed to deny employment to married gays, but also allowed to define their own position. However, on the 8th of March 2019, a Pretoria High Court judgment overturned the Dutch Reformed Church's decision not to recognise same-sex unions within the church. The church decided not to appeal the decision. Methodist Church of Southern Africa. Note: the church accepts same-sex relationships as long as such relationships are not marriage. But how else would it be? Uniting Presbyterian Church in Southern Africa. Note: each minister may exercise his or her conscience and support same-sex unions. North America Anglican MCCNY Church in New York City. Grace Gospel Chapel in Seattle. Oh fuck, it goes on and on and on. It's most of the church in the West. Lutheran Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the ELCAs, document a social statement on human sexuality, gift and trust. Notes: while Lutherans hold various convictions regarding lifelong monogamous same-gender relationships, this church is united on many critical issues. It opposes all forms of verbal or physical harassment and assault based on sexual orientation. It supports legislation, blah blah blah. Boring. I wonder what that shitty music is. Fucking Christ. Oh my God, Swedenborgian Church of North America. What the hell is the Swedenborgian Church of North America? Swedenborgian Church of North America. For the General Convention of the Swedenborgian Church, see the New Church. The Swedenborgian Church in North America, also known as the General Convention of the Church of the New Jerusalem, is one of a few Christian sects that draws its faith from the Bible as illuminated by the teachings of Emanuel Swedenborg, 1688 to 1772. The administrative offices of the denomination located at 50 Quincy Street, Cambridge, Massachusetts. Cross of the Swedenborgian Church. Fuck, how bizarre. Beliefs. Church of the Holy City in Washington, D.C. The Church believes that the writings of Swedenborg expand on a deeper understanding of the Christian Bible. This new understanding began the second coming of Christ, which is continually being manifested in spirit and truth rather than a physical appearance. The Swedenborgian Church of North America doesn't make any statements as to the exact authority of Swedenborg's writings on the Bible or to the correctness of either. Each society and member is given the responsibility to arrive at their own conclusions, and the denomination allows for discussion and debate. It is also liberal on social issues and sexual ethics, such as the ordination of women, homosexuality, and abortion. Structure. The Swedenborgian Church has a congregational form of governance. Local churches, often called societies from regional associations, and those associations send delegates to an annual convention. The Centre for Swedenborgian Studies operates as a denomination's theological training institution and seminary. The centre is located at Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California. The church also operates an online church called Swedenborgian Community Online, which provides weekly resources on its website and social media. In 2003, the Swedenborgian Church of North America had about 1,800 members, almost identical to the membership it had in 1981, but rather less than the 5,440 it had in 1925. New Jerusalem Church in Bridgewater, Massachusetts, is Swedenborgian Church of North America. Affiliations, see also references. Let's go back. Well, surely it's Emanuel Swedenborg. I've got 7 minutes left in this 20-minute section. Emanuel Swedenborg, blah blah. The 8th of born Emanuel Swedberg, 8th of February, OS, 29th of January, 1688 to the 29th of March 1772, was a Swedish pluralistic Christian theologian, scientist, philosopher and mystic. He became best known for his book on the afterlife, Heaven and Hell, 1758, Emanuel Swedenborg. Portrait of Swedenborg by Carl Friedrich von Breda. Born Emanuel Swedberg, 8th of February 1688, Stockholm, Swedish Empire. Died 29th of March 1772, aged 84, London, England. Education, Uppsala University. Oh, load of shit. Notable work: True Christian Religion, Heaven and Hell. Theological work: Era 18th century, Traditional Movement, Lutheranism inspired the new church. Main interests: theology, science, philosophy. Notable ideas: Trinity in one person, correspondence, the Last Judgment and Christ's Second Coming began in 1757. Swedenborg had a prolific career as an inventor and scientist. In 1741, at 53, he entered into a spiritual phase in which he began to experience dreams and visions, notably on Easter weekend, on the 6th of April 1744. His experiences culminated in a spiritual awakening in which he received a revelation that Jesus Christ had appointed him to write the heavenly doctrine to reform Christianity. According to the heavenly doctrine, the Lord had opened Swedenborg's spiritual eyes so that from then on he could freely visit heaven and hell to converse with angels, demons, and other spirits, and the Last Judgment had already occurred the year before the 1758 publication of De Nova Hierusalima Ejus Doctrina Coelesti, concerning the New Jerusalem and its heavenly doctrine, 1757. Over the last 28 years of his life, Swedenborg wrote 18 published theological works and several more that remained unpublished. He termed himself a servant of the Lord Jesus Christ and true Christian religion, which he published himself. Some followers of the heavenly doctrine believe that of his theological works, only those that were published by Swedenborg himself are fully divinely inspired. Others regarded all Swedenborg's theological works as equally inspired, saying, for example, that the fact that some works were not written out in a final edited form for publication does not make a single statement less trustworthy than the statements in any of the other works. The New Church, a new religious movement originally founded in 1787 and comprising several historically related Christian denominations, reveres Swedenborg's writings as revelation. Early life. Memorial plaque at the former location of Swedenborg's house at Hornsgatan in Södermalm, Stockholm. Swedenborg's father, Jasper Swedberg, 1653 to 1735, descended from a wealthy mining family, the first known paternal ancestor being Otto Persson from Sundborn parish, mentioned 1571. He travelled abroad and studied theology, and on returning home, he was eloquent enough to impress the Swedish king Charles XI with his sermons in Stockholm. Through the king's influence, he would later become professor of theology at Uppsala University and Bishop of Skara. Jespers took an interest in the beliefs of the dissenting Lutheran Pietist movement, which emphasized the virtues of communion with God rather than relying on sheer faith, sola fide. Sola fide is a tenet of the Lutheran Church, and Jasper was charged with being a Pietist heretic. While controversial, the beliefs were to have a major impact on his son Emmanuel's spirituality. Jasper furthermore held the unconventional belief that angels and spirits were present in everyday life. This also came to have a strong impact on Emmanuel. In 1703 to 1709, Swedenborg lived in Erik Benselius the Younger's house. Swedenborg completed his university course at Uppsala in 1709, and in 1710 he made his grand tour through the Netherlands, France and Germany before reaching London, where he would spend the next 4 years. It was also a flourishing centre of scientific ideas and discoveries. Swedenborg studied physics, mechanics and philosophy, and read and wrote poetry. According to the preface of a book by the Swedish critic Olaf Lagercrantz, Swedenborg wrote to his benefactor and brother-in-law Benselius that he believed he might be destined to be a great scientist. Scientific period. The flying machine sketched in this notebook from 1714. The operator would sit in the middle and paddle himself through the air. page 32 on the video clip at 5:48 on its timeline. What? Anyway, in 1715, Swedenborg returned to Sweden, where he devoted himself to natural science and engineering projects for the next 2 decades. A first step was his meeting with King Charles XII of Sweden in the city of Lund in 1716. The Swedish inventor Christopher Polhem, who became a close friend of Swedenborg, was also present. Swedenborg's purpose was to persuade the king to fund an observatory in northern Sweden. However, the warlike king did not consider this project important enough, but did appoint Swedenborg to be Assessor Extraordinary on the Swedish Board of Mines, Bergscollegium in Stockholm.